Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I've been reliably informed we're actually live. I'm obliged to inform you that this meeting is being live streamed and recorded. And for the ease of people who are watching, what I'm going to do is introduce you to everybody. So I've got officers on each side of me. The next three rows are councillors, and then at the back we've got portfolio holder and more officers. So if I start with James, I'll go down this way. So my name's Claire Wild, I'm chair, I'm councillor for Severn Valley. Okay, James.
Thank you, Chair. My name's James Hall, and I'm the council's executive director of resources.
Councillor Joyce Barron, chair of the placeholder Scrutinity Committee and member of the same proposal.
Councillor Robert Macy, I'm the member of the Bowen Slash and the Western Rim Division and chair of the community development.
Councillor Julia Buckley, Bridge North West and Tasford.
Sarah does feedback in the team infrastructure council.
The gentleman behind you, Sarah, who's that? Sorry, are you over with the public?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Sorry. Okay, so I think it's Alden, isn't it?
That's Nigel Newman, head of
Oh,
communications.
sorry, no, it's not. Sorry. I haven't met you before, that's obvious, isn't it? Sorry, carry on again. Sorry, Nigel.
Nigel Newman, head of communications at Catchment.
Let's go with Bridge North West and Tasford.
Roger Evans, London Division Council.
Thank you, Roger. I'll pass to my right to Andy.
Andy Begley, Chief Executive Council.
Councillor Jones, Shoreby Councillor and Chairman of the Health and Adult Services Open Committee.
Representing Richard Shaw. Chair of people.
Councillor David Basma from Anthony.
Councillor Rob Gittins, I represent the Chesterfield Diamond Division. I'm also the portfolio holder for things technology, data, and business insights.
This is another member of the public, Claire, in front of me, and I am Amanda Holyoke, the committee officer.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. So I'm going to move to the agenda now. Item number 1 is apologies, there are none. Item number 2 is disclosable pecuniary interest. Do I have anybody wishing to declare an interest? No. Before we move on to item 3, Alan, would you just like to introduce yourself for the benefit of people who are watching?
Alan Mosley, Councillor for Castleford Village.
Thank you. Item number 3 is the minutes from the last meeting. Has everyone read them and are they happy with them?
Chair, Councillor Basma, can I just raise just one issue in minutes?
Yeah.
Looking at item 10, financial outturn, does all of the members asked a series of questions, including those covering a number of points. Once it's very more detailed answers will be provided outside the meeting. I raised some of those points. I don't remember. I could get a lot of emails. I don't remember getting responses on all those number of points that I raised.
Okay, I'll ask James the question.
Thank you, Chair. I will have to go back and check. There were, I think, probably over 3 or 4 meetings. There were a number of questions you asked around the outturn because you went to a number of different committee meetings. I know responses were provided. Whether all of those responses, all the things you asked, all those questions, I'll have to go back and double check. But my belief is we answered all the questions, but I will check.
On that basis, are you happy with the minutes?
Yes, I'm happy with minutes, that's fine.
Okay, thank you. So can I have a proposer for the minutes, please? Peggy. The seconder?
I'll second.
Oh, it's a second. Sorry. Sorry, Simon. Right, can we have a show of hands, please, just to make sure everyone's happy? Yeah, okay, fine, thank you. Before we move on, we have Alden, who's joining us via video link. Would you like to introduce yourself, Alden?
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Alden Whitaker-Brown. I'm currently an interim assistant director for business intelligence, which covers ICT, communications and engagement, the scrutiny function, and a couple of other bits and pieces. I joined the organisation back at the beginning of November 2020. It's good to meet you all.
Thank you very much. So item number 4 is public questions, so no public questions. Item number 5 is member questions. There are no member questions. So we move on to item 6, which is the annual customer feedback report 2021. And the lead officer is Nigel. I don't know if Nigel or Sarah want to just talk us briefly through the report.
Thank you, Chair. As Sarah is the author of the appendix, I will hand over to Sarah, who's much closer to the detail than me on that.
Okay, thank you.
Just shared my screen, so hopefully I can see a few slides there.
Yeah, everyone can see those, yeah? Yeah, carry on.
So it's not letting me move forward. There's a bit of a delay. I'll carry on without if that's okay and see if it catches up.
Okay.
So the customer feedback annual report is a report that is required to be prepared each year. We also undertake a variety of other reporting through the year. We have quarterly performance reports shared widely among all managers. We undertake monthly and bi-monthly reporting for social care complaints because they require specific attention to meet the statutory timescales and responsibilities. And we do a lot of reporting on requests. So I just wanted to make a point really that a lot of work goes in behind to look at performance over time, and we don't do this just on an annual basis. But the annual report is a really useful way of sort of looking back over the year, comparing to previous years and looking out for sort of trends because we have more data available. Oh, hang on, there.
Okay.
So I've just prepared a table that people should be able to see there with feedback summary. We had 2,615 feedback cases altogether. Compared to 2019-20, that's quite a similar volume. We saw an increase in compliments, many of those related to the pandemic work that's taking place. It was very rewarding and encouraging thing for staff members to see the compliments coming in while they were working really hard through the pandemic months, and it's nice to see that reflected in the overall totals at the end of the year. So 23% of the feedback were compliments. We had 1,200 complaint cases. That is a reduction on the previous year, and they formed 46% of all feedback cases. And 801 comments for action to note. Slight increase on comments, but nothing of concern. We've seen increases in the MP inquiries we receive. Now we measure MP inquiries separately to complaints because often an MP inquiry can be from the same customer or covering the same complaint, so they can duplicate. So I think it's important to put that out. It's important to not include the MP inquiries in the overall customer feedback total. But the report does cover MP inquiries in some detail. We've seen a really good reduction in adult social care complaints. It's been really positive, the improvement we've seen over the last 12 months and more. We have had some focused work taking place to ensure complaints are responded to very promptly. We have seen a slight increase in children's social care complaints, and I think that's in the context of more children and families being supported by the service. And we are working very closely with children's services to look at those. So as you can see, only 60, so the numbers are still quite small, but they are important cases. When we consider complaint investigations, just wanted to highlight the process here. So we have complaints cases. Not every case will result in a complaints investigation. So sometimes a complaint may be withdrawn at the request of the complainant. It may, after we've started looking at the case, we might find it's outside of the council's jurisdiction, and there can be a number of other reasons why a case may be withdrawn at the early stage. We could have multiple investigations in one complaints case, particularly if the complaint is quite complex, it includes a large number of issues, and we may need to allocate an investigation to multiple teams and service areas. So we sometimes see that with, say, a complaint that covers planning and highways and maybe public protection. We would have three investigations. You'll note in the report that quite a few cases closed to service requests, and that's an important part of the process as well. If somebody contacts us and reports, for example, a missed bin collection, that's a request for a service. That's very quick remedial action that can be undertaken to just go and make sure that bin is collected. So that wouldn't require a full complaints investigation as this is a formal complaint. So we might convert a case into a service request. Another example could be a noise issue. If we weren't previously aware of that noise issue, it would go into the service request process and be picked up by the relevant team and investigated as a noise case and not as a complaint. So the total there, we had 1,091 complaint investigations. Apologies, those charts are a little bit small, but just to highlight what they say. The main problem category for most complaints in the year that we're considering were service standards. So that would be examples. So maybe it's like delay in providing a service, maybe some queries about the quality of a service, or a complaint that we didn't act on, something that's kind of public does we should respond to. That tends to be the main category. That's been common for a number of years now. The slide shows the complaints by directorate, and you'll see that PACE forms the main body of complaints, but we have more public-facing services, perhaps, where every household will be receiving a service, so you might be waste, highway, those sorts of service areas. So it's as you'd expect. The complaint outcomes performance, in my opinion, is very positive. I would like to see this sort of breakdown of outcome types. If I saw there were too few cases being upheld, I would probably question that. That would indicate maybe that we weren't taking responsibility for issues when they've gone wrong. Nobody expects to deliver a perfect service all of the time, so you expect to see a proportion of upheld complaints. So you see there the breakdown with upheld and not upheld complaint outcomes. I'm really overall, I think, on looking at the way that's split up performance into concerns last year, it's quite positive. We had 82 cases within the year progressing beyond stage 1. Now, different complaints types have different numbers of stages, so there isn't a stage 2 for adult social care, for example, but 82 cases does reflect a slight increase in the escalated cases, but I'll come back to that later. I've looked at a detailed breakdown where those cases were, and predominantly they're spread across all service areas and teams, that there aren't really big clusters of cases progressing. The only one I was highlighted was slightly, that's more planning. Planning complaints tend to be incredibly complex, and that's why we see more planning cases progressing beyond stage 1. We had 50 cases decided by the Ombudsman in the financial year. That is a drop compared to previous years. It's important that I highlight here that the Ombudsman suspended their casework 3 months during the year in the height of the pandemic. So they weren't taking cases on. So I would expect to see that number rise considerably in the next financial year. To give an overview of performance, we've seen an increase in compliments, mentioned, the real improvement in adult social care performance, been really positive to see, because those cases can often be quite complex. We are starting to see improvements coming through in our work with highways, quite some project group work that we've been doing across service areas to look at complaints performance, because it was one of the things highlighted in the previous year, and we're seeing some positive developments. I mentioned that on the next bullet, a few themes. So just to explain that, we theme each complaint investigation, so we allocate a sort of a heading to it. So it might be a pothole, grass cutting, street lighting, for example, would be. We are seeing very few clusters of complaints around themes. They're quite spread out. That's positive because it means that we don't have particular problems within a service area that need to be addressed. If we saw huge numbers coming through on one theme, that would indicate there were service quality issues that needed to be addressed. But that isn't something that we need. My summary and this personal reflection of the data is that it was a very challenging year for Shropshire Council, and even in those circumstances, overall performance remains quite similar to previous years. And just the last point there about the ombudsman cases, difficult to draw too many conclusions from that data. Issues and trends. I mentioned MP inquiries earlier. We have seen a lot more MP inquiries coming through. I think we've had a 36.4% increase from the previous year. Now that isn't something within our control, but I feel it's important to mention it because these cases are then considered and responded to alongside complaints, and it does put more pressure on the same members of staff dealing with the cases. So it's important to look at that as well in the bigger picture. There have been increases in the days to close complaint investigations, and we have seen investigations exceeding the timescales that are set. Now, the full report suggests that that's a very small difference. So I think we had an average of 22 days last year and 23 days this year. And 22 days and 23 days are well within the 30-day performance timescale. However, that's an average. So we are seeing some very effective complaints handling where responses are sent very quickly, and then we are seeing things going overdue. So the average performance shouldn't be considered as the only measure. So this is something that we're working with teams of services on through our quarterly performance reporting and through our regular performance reporting with service areas. So it's something that we're looking to address. That would be a priority area for addressing it in this coming year. There are sort of anecdotal evidence suggests that areas are under pressure, and that has caused days closed. It is also potentially causing the increase in cases escalating beyond stage 1. We do work very closely with teams and we try to take some remedial action to take pressure off. So we use complaint templates, we provide quality checking, support, and do as much as we can, reminders, regular lists, so we can see when cases are due and diary things in. So it's just about using good organisational skills to try and reduce pressures as much as possible people and ensure responses are sent out within timescales. Another area we are concerned about as a team, as a support service, is the quality of complaint responses. Some of them are excellent. You can have very complex cases and officers do an amazing job responding. I'm quite impressed personally by some of the responses that are issued. However, we do also see sometimes a lack of understanding that these are complaints in a formal process and require a formal response. So occasionally we see an informal email in response to a complaint, and we should remind us that that approach is the approach that the Ombudsman would expect from us. I just wanted, recommendations are on page 21 of the report. I just wanted to pick out 4 areas. These would be the priority areas to focus on. Working with services to reduce the volume of service requests that unnecessarily escalate to complaints. Communicating the importance of timescales and the impact of escalations, and we're planning some internal communications work on that. We would like to try and reduce case escalations if possible, and that will require some focused work where we see issues arising. We keep a close eye on the data as it's coming through. It doesn't require very specific response work. Although it isn't mentioned in any detail in the report, we do have some concerns about the number of repeat customers we are seeing using the complaints process. So there's a huge spectrum of repeat customers. There are customers who are making repeat complaints because they don't feel their initial inquiry has been responded to effectively and have a genuine concern. Then there are repeat customers who maybe have had a response but don't like the response that they've received and don't want to accept the council's decision. So we have a big spectrum of repeat customers. It's costly to the organisation. We can end up having a large number of officers involved in cases. We can have scattergunning where customers are using multiple processes, and we need to focus on streamlining and reducing the cost of that impact. So we are planning work with the West Midlands complaints officers to share good practice in this area. I think it's an area we can learn from others on. So that would be great. That would be just a recommendation for the next year. If I could just mention, that's the end of my slides, but if I could just mention one last thing, and that is I did make a mistake on page 11 of this draft report. It's been circulated in the table, comparing previous year's figures. And I just wanted to highlight that that will be corrected in the copy that is shared with the Cabinet, plus any other changes that are suggested following this meeting.
Okay, thank you. Before I open up for questions, do you have quite a robust vexatious policy?
Yes, we have a policy.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
We have template letters that are issued as well at each stage of the policy. So the first stage is a warning, where we highlight that the behaviour of that complainant is causing problems. Then we follow up with a formal letter imposing restrictions on contact. So, for example, we might ask the customer to just communicate with one named officer, and that streamlines all of the communications and allows us to understand in full the issues. And then we review any restrictions in contact methods after 6 months.
Okay, thank you. Yes, David.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to concentrate on highways, and I noticed on page 7 of your report, you said that 30% of all construction council complaints relate to highways. And then on page 21, on the recommendations, you say that you've been doing some focused project work with highways. It would be interesting to know what that was about, more details about that. And also, you talked about the repeat complaints, and I wondered whether there are more from highways than from other areas, because obviously, I'm well aware, as I'm sure other members are, the number of complaints you get about potholes, other problems, and I just wondered whether repeat complaints, tend to be more from highways than from other directions.
Interestingly, no, we don't see many repeat complaints from highways, and we don't see many highways cases escalating either. So we don't get many in stage 1. So in that respect, performance is quite positive. I think we are seeing too many cases of the highways escalating into a complaint when they should be resolved at an earlier stage, and that's the main issue we have. So we've been working very closely with Steve Smith to look at the data. So we've produced really detailed data sheets and examples of cases, so we can see in full the types of cases that perhaps could have been picked up at an earlier stage. So some of the issues with the highways, I think reasoning in a high volume, they're really processing issues that we needed to make changes to the way information comes in and is processed.
Sorry,
Okay.
on the highways, was it focused project work? Was that
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you. So Alan's next, and then Julie. And then
It's got a comment and query about paragraph 8.5 on page 3, where it says that it took an average of 23 days to respond to a complaint. And that is one day more than the previous year, but actually it's up from 14 days in 28-29. That's an enormous deterioration in the time to actually respond to a complaint. That's somewhat muddled with the actual time it takes to actually complete the outcome of any investigations into a complaint, which appears to be 30 days at each stage, but we don't get information about how many of the complaints and the investigations are actually completed during that time. But particularly for 23 days to respond to a complaint, that seems inordinately long to me, and it kicks in with what I and other councillors, I believe, are finding more recently, and that getting responses from queries to officers is becoming increasingly difficult if we get them at all. And one area that's been mentioned already is a culprit in that, but there are others, and I do think we need to give some attention, please, to, and hopefully this department could do that, to investigating the level of response, the time of response, and the success of the responses that members are obtaining in requests for information, advice and action, because it's going seriously embarrassing and reflecting badly, reputationally, both on we as councillors, but also on the council as a whole.
Okay, thank you, Alan.
Would you like to comment on that, to provide a little bit more information? It's we have a standard 30-day response timescale for our corporate complaints. Now, that crosses so many different service areas and functions, and it might seem long for a very straightforward issue, but it does provide enough time for complex cases. So, for example, you might need to interview people as part of your complaints investigation. You might need to organise to review case records. There can be a lot of work involved in investigating a complaint before you respond. So I just wanted to provide that context, really. It varies across service areas on the nature of the function you're delivering and the type of issue to raise.
Okay, is that something that we can get a bit more data on in the future?
Yes,
Excellent. Yeah.
Just to say, I mean, there's responding to a complaint and then there's carrying out an investigation. But I would hope that people aren't sitting waiting 23 days to go a letter saying, we've received your complaint, this is the procedure that we'll be following. For any further information or advice that you need, please contact us. And it's not just that we all appreciate that some of the investigations may be complex, but that response is ought to be a lot quicker than 23 days. And certainly needs some explanation why in 2 years it's gone from 14 days to 23 days.
Right, okay.
All complaints are acknowledged within 5 working days. So complainants are contacted during that time. They know that their complaint is being investigated, who's investigating it, when they can expect their response. So it's not that they contact the council and don't hear anything for 30 days. They will receive information within 5 working days as a maximum. The statutory case, that's 3 working days.
Okay, thank you. So I've got Julia next.
Thank you. So I also noted that the transport complaints were the highest, and then when we go into the data as to what nature of complaints, there is a high number of issues around quality of delivery of service than any other issue. Then we get to page 27 of the report, and we see that the main remedy for transport and highways issues that got to the Ombudsman was an apology and a payment made. So bearing in mind that there's obviously a resource implication to responding and dealing with complaints, what would be really helpful in this grid would be to see the financial implication. So how many payments, what is the actual financial cost to the council where payments have been made against these complaints? And secondly, for areas like highways where we have a contractor, are those costs then put on to the contractor who has delivered either substandard or below target?
Okay, that's a very good question.
It's very rare that payments are made for highway cases. Very, very unusual. I can't remember one. We've seen some for that would, the potholes would be normally picked up through the insurance process. So that would be a separate data set. For complaints where payments are made, it's usually service areas such as social care and planning, where they're really complex cases. We get a few, but then they're not many. But we can certainly collect data we've got on those cases. Just one thing to highlight as well, going back to your first point on the proportion of highways cases and the quality issue. Just to explain that, and I can find data, it's really helpful to look at the number we've had, then the complaint outcome against them, because often the perception is that the service has been of a poor quality, but when an investigator's looked at it, often, you know, the work has been carried out in line with quality and in line with acceptable process. So it's not, the outcome is not always that the complaint is upheld. But I'm really happy to provide more detailed data.
Okay, thank you. So, Roger.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got a couple of comments on the board. But first of all, picking up on some of the answers that have been given, I get a reply from residents, and I know that other councillors do, that I leave a note, I send a comment in, and I get no answer. I hear the complaints are answered within 5 days. So how is a complaint registered? Is it paperwork? Is it by an email? Somebody rings in to say, I have a complaint. Said that they're all looked after before acknowledged within 5 days. I'm getting people tell me that they've complained about so and so and so and so, and no action has been taken. And I noted that on page 12 or 8 of the report, page 12, I think, there is there about in 1920, 16% of complaints resulted in no finding. It's dropped to 10%. It's being monitored, and is this connected with the, I've got to say it, the lack of an answer that they're getting from Shropshire Council? I think the Chief Executive is trying to follow it up to find out why answers are not given when people begin with comments, complaints, or whatever queries. But I wondered about the 5-day complaint procedure there. Is there a paperwork trail? Is there a form that has to be filled in to actually register the complaint? And then I've got something else, please, Chairman.
Okay, just to confirm, there's you're next and then Joyce. Okay, Sarah, would you like to answer those two questions?
So, I think the first element was how people can make a complaint. They can make a complaint in any way through online, through the website. They can phone us, they can email us, they can write to us. There's a variety of ways that we take complaints. The acknowledgement is issued to the 5-day timescale for corporate complaints, but some customers call their issue a complaint when it hasn't been received by the feedback and insight team. So there's some challenges there in how complaints are received. So if the team has the case, then it is properly acknowledged. If a customer has just raised an issue and it's gone through another process, I can't comment on the timescales applied for those processes. But the point made about no finding proportion, I agree that must be a priority area to look at, and that we should minimise the number of cases with a no finding outcome. So the no finding outcome is not at the acknowledgement stage, that is following investigation, and that is when there can be a genuine reason for no finding, and that might be that there isn't enough information available to investigate, or it may, in some rare circumstances, be that the complaint response has not been provided. We need to ensure that complaint response is always provided.
So just to clarify that, if you want to make an official complaint, you can either email corporate complaints, is that right? Or you can ring up customer services, give them your name and address, and tell them the nature of your complaint. Or could you email customer services or not?
The email address is customer.feedback@shropshire.co.uk.
Right, so it's customer feedback. So it's not the insight team, which was the next question.
Customer feedback is the name of our email inbox, but it's
Right,
customer feedback and insight.
So there's two ways to email in with a complaint, or you can ring up and give your name and address.
Yes.
Okay, so that's helpful. So you've got that, Roger.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I think from what I understand that's just been said is that maybe some of the telephone queries, complaints that are made are then go to the appropriate department without being registered as a complaint or anything like this, so it doesn't go to be given a system, so it isn't clear. But if I can come back to complaints, there were 2,000 something complaints. 1,200 were completed in stage 1. That 800, I can see some in the rest of the paperwork, but I can't see what happened to the other 800. Are these included in the ones with no follow-up or whatever? I'm not sure.
Okay, Sarah,
there were a large proportion still open at the end of the year, so a large proportion remain open. So the data for the outcomes is only looking at the closed complaints.
If I can, Chairman, so the number of days to resolve a complaint are the ones that are resolved. The ones that are still open, the clock is still ticking. So the number of days taken to resolve may alter in this new year because of the number that have been carried over.
Yeah.
So we're looking at that more closely in the sort of quarterly performance reporting and the other reports we do for those. But yes, that's right. So the data we're looking at in the main report is more closed cases.
My last one, if I can, Chairman, and that is on page 26 or 22, and I'm not sure whether it's good or bad, is a satisfactory remedy provided by the authority on upheld cases where 0 this compares to an average of 10% in similar authorities. Does that mean that the majority weren't there, or I'm not sure what that actual figure means? Should we have tried to resolve it and we failed, or is it not resolvable prior to going to it or not? A little bit of background on that graphic that is produced there.
Okay, can you?
I must admit to being slightly confused by that ombudsman measure myself, because the data included in the appendix are all of the cases where they required us to take action, and we took action against all of them. So we fulfilled all of the recommendations that we were given by the ombudsman. I'm not sure what they mean by the, I will need to ask the ombudsman that. When I look at the data for the other local authorities, it was similar to ours, very, very low numbers. It isn't a measure that has been used really, particularly in previous years. I think they started to introduce it last year, but it says some work is required for the ombudsman on that particular measure. But I can confirm that the appendix shows that action has been taken on all of the cases where we were required to act.
So perhaps you can get some clarification and report back to Amanda and we'll pass it on.
Will do.
Okay, thank you. Les?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say that on the withdrawn cases, is it the case there where someone complains if they withdraw themselves? How does that happen? Some sense of high withdrawal rate.
We get quite a high number of cases that are outside of council jurisdictions, so we get quite a lot of the town councils, parish councils, region councils, and we might give that to the customer and just redirect them to the right complaints organisation and their process. So we, we'll help customers along the way really to make sure that their case is picked up properly, but it might not be one push up to council.
So this is the case of customer complaining and reporting themselves.
Occasionally a customer will report themselves. Sometimes we might get an email a couple of weeks later saying, I've changed my mind, I don't want to pay the complaint. Or sometimes they're working really closely with a member of staff and the member of staff has already resolved the issue and that's just I don't need to take the complaint forward. So there's a huge spectrum. It's hard to we do look at each case on a case-by-case basis and take the right course of action. So sometimes when we're looking across the wider numbers, it's not very easy to break the data down.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Joyce?
Are complaints made, complaints that made councillors processed into this system? For example, somebody complains about a pothole to me, and I get in touch with an officer. Does that get processed into the complaint, or is that sort of lost in the ether? What happens to time-sensitive complaints? For example, I had someone contact me a couple of days ago. Her child had gone to school. She'd phoned 4 times for information about whether her child could get transport to school. She had been told that this child could go on the school bus, but hadn't actually had verification and didn't know what transport. I actually contacted our officers, who I had to say acted incredibly quickly, and that lady has an email telling her exactly what was happening. But she contacted us 4 times, kept being told someone will get back to you later on 4 different days, and they didn't. So what happens to something like that? I assume that won't go into the system because it wasn't reported as a complaint other than to me.
Yeah, because it's a bit like the MP complaints, it will just tell the figures.
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask a quick question. You say in the report that the number of complaints about children's services have gone up. We've obviously, over lockdown, we've obviously seen a huge increase in the number of looked after children. And I appreciate the sensitivity of discussing these things, but I just wondered, how do you split that up? Is that somebody complaining because that they think somebody with children needs help, or is it actually complaining about the help they're getting? Because obviously a lot of cases came from nowhere and we had no idea where they were coming from. And perhaps that's something that perhaps Peggy's committee could look at. But I think it's one of those things where it would be helpful just to look into that.
Can I just ask as well? Is it possible that we could have the data about the complaints so we can see if there are some trends come to just our scrutiny.
Yeah.
Children's services difficult to see.
I think the trouble is with data protection and everything, you probably won't be able to find out enough to be useful behind the data. I don't know. That's kind of the question I'm asking Sarah.
We could do a more detailed report to children's services if that could be helpful, but there are small numbers, so finding patterns in the data is difficult because the numbers are so low and they tend to be spread across the different teams and services. That it will be predominantly complaints where a service has been provided, and then it might be a question about the quality of that service or on as well as the customer would have liked. But it doesn't tend to be so much at the very early stage. It's usually after a service has been provided and work has taken place.
Okay. Okay. So, I didn't notice in the report, have you got, and it's kind of linked to the same, have you got antisocial behaviour record of complaints in your data or not?
Anti-social behaviour is one of the themes that will be, but you get very few complaints about anti-social behaviour, very few. I had a query recently about that, most of the antisocial behaviour issues are picked up through their process, their specific antisocial behaviour process. Very few ever escalate into complaints.
Okay, I just wondered if that would be helpful for Peggy when she looks at the, to try and tease out, how we could make improvements in service. Okay, thank you very much indeed, Sarah.
Just on that.
Yeah.
I mean, is there a process by which complaints that come into a department, which are noted within the department, are actually referred on and recorded in this data gathering that we've just been talking about?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Did you get that, Sarah?
Is that pre-complaint? I wouldn't have access to pre-complaint data coming into services and going through their processes, but service data might give an insight into volumes across different service areas. I'm sure if that answers the question.
No, I think you need to answer the question again.
Sorry, I didn't quite hear the response.
No, I don't think Sarah really understood the question.
If I'm a member of the public and I make a complaint to Highways about potholes, is that in any way passed on from Highways into this system of complaints, or are we just dealing with people who take the trouble of filling in a formal complaint and address it to centralised complaints body?
Yeah, okay, you got that.
Apologies, I didn't understand yet. Yes, each service area, if they have a formal complaint, must report it to us, and we lodge the complaint system and we follow the complaints procedure. So it isn't just members of the public coming in. If a service area is made aware of a complaint, they immediately let us know.
So to answer that then, if somebody says to Highways, I'm complaining about the potholes outside my house or on Heathgate roundabout, that is supposed to be referred to the central complaints department.
Yeah.
And recorded.
Yeah, but if you, Joyce or Roger or anybody else,
it
is no, because there's an element of duplication. Yeah. So it should be added.
If I could just say, if remedial action can be taken to resolve the issue, it doesn't have to escalate into a formal complaint. If you can act on an issue as it's raised, that will be dealt with as an informal complaint. And that's following the Ombudsman's guidance. So for example, the example I gave about in this bin collection, I'm complaining that my bin hasn't been collected. Well, we'll just collect your bin. If that doesn't become a formal complaint, the waste services wouldn't tell us about that case. But if they say, my bin has been missed 3 times, you've damaged my bin on collection, then that would be a complaint and we will take it forward. So there does need to be a bit of assessment at the beginning to make sure that it is a formal complaint worthy of investigation, and that it isn't just a simple matter that can be resolved by the service area.
Okay, so really there's going to be a certain percentage of variation within figures, really, when you take everything into account. Okay, so I think that, thank you very much, Sarah, that's been very interesting. I think perhaps the best thing for us to do is note the report unless anybody has portfolio holder. Rob, sorry.
Yes, yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I just wanted to quickly make a few comments just to thank officers for a very good report, and also thank yourselves, Scrutinity, for doing a very, very good piece of work on this this afternoon. I just wanted to highlight just a couple of points. As mentioned, by about 30% of cases do come home their ways. As administration, we are putting in more than money. We are putting in place extra personnel, and we are changing working practices. So I would obviously hope to see in the next 12 to 18 months the number of complaints coming down there. But in the general compliments are up and complaints are down. So things are going well, but we do obviously need to put in a bit of work in cases there.
Okay, thank you. I think with all this, and I have had conversations with Alden, and perhaps he'd like to say a few words in a minute. But I think what we need to do is we need to take this data and also our performance data and actually use it in a positive way to better understand what's going on. Because just doing the data for data's sake, we're not actually getting any benefit. But if we can improve our performance monitoring as well, then actually we can get some useful stuff out and give departments ways of perhaps collecting their data slightly differently, so that we can gain benefit out of the work that we do rather than do the work and it just sits on the shelf and we pat ourselves on the back. Alden, have you got anything to say? Sorry, yes, Alden, you're there.
Yeah, I'm absolutely here, and this becomes the central part of the presentation I'm about to give. So it all lines up very well that this is about becoming a performance-driven organisation. It's a journey that we're on. I think complaints becomes one of those classic examples of how, if we know more about what the inputs are, what the complaints are, where they're coming from, how they're being dealt with, we can do more to manage those as a combination of officers and members. And so this is why we are developing a performance management framework which will drive all that we do at the council, not just the complaints. And that will become absolutely the subject of what I'm about to discuss. And hopefully those two things will start to fit together in our minds.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Alden. So is everyone happy that we note this report and we listen to what Alden has to say? Because I think you'll be very interested in what in Alden's ideas. Roger.
Yes, Chairman. There was one comment about providing some data sheets and something like that for the next time, and that could be added to the request that one of my colleagues here said about receiving some examples of data for it, and it would be interesting. I think that comment was made early on today.
Okay, we can organise that. Yeah. So is everyone happy we note the report? Can I just see? All happy? Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much indeed, and thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Nigel. You're more than welcome to stay if you like, but we would understand if you wanted to leave. Okay, so item number 7 is the performance management reporting. And Alden is going to talk to us about this. I think you've got a few assistants there, but we'll let you start off, Alden.
Thank you very much, Chair. If you don't mind, I'll share some slides as well that I've put together, and this is building on some of the things that you and I have discussed, Chair, previously. I'm just hoping that when I press all the right buttons, it will happen accordingly. I live in a Welsh valley and have infamous issues. Can you see? I think you can see that, can you? Yes, brilliant. I can see it on my screen. So I want to talk today about a journey that we're on, and what I'm not able to do at this stage is to give you the conclusions of which KPIs each of the scrutiny committees will have in front of them and what format they will take, because we are in so many cases across what we're doing in modernising the organisation, as I say, on something of a journey. I hope that this there's a bit of a delay, that's fine. So by way of an introduction, as we know, our council exists only to serve the people, the businesses and the environment of our county. And we are establishing currently an organisational performance management framework. That's to make this distinction between individual performance management, which is very much an HR focused issue. The other end of that golden thread is organisational performance management to track our progress and to drive our continuous improvement. That means that what we are saying we want to become, and this is very much the vision of the current administration and officers, is a performance-driven organisation, not an organisation that exists to deliver against a policy, but to deliver against our performance and to make sure that the outcomes for our customers are what we set out for them to be. So by having a performance-driven organisation, we hope that we will have an evidence base that drives all our decisions, all of our strategy making, all of our policy and deliverables, such that we meet those predetermined objectives and outcomes that we set for all of our customers, whomsoever they may be. Now, before I go on to a bit more about how that evolving performance management framework is coming to life, let's talk just briefly about some of the existing KPIs and performance resources that we do have in place that you have access to already. And you may have already seen the revised format for the quarterly performance report. So we submitted a report in the required format, but also deigned to go further in terms of the presentation of the corporate performance report using more graphics to try and make them more visual. One of the things that I think is very important when we're sharing information and data, insight and other bits of information across the authorities, to make them as accessible as possible. And I think burying things in long wordy documents doesn't really help us, and what we need is more high level visuals that allow us to understand things in an instant. The other thing that we've had for some time is the Shropshire Performance Portal. And yesterday we began the process with some positive feedback. I hadn't realised, I'm sorry to say, that access to that directly from the members gateway wasn't at that time possible, but that will be built in. Hopefully by the end of the week you'll have a button on the members gateway which will take you straight to the page that you see on the right hand side there, which is the Shropshire Performance Portal. And that's set out against the 6 areas that existed in the previous or the current corporate plan, which is that of a healthy environment, a good place to do business, the sustainable places and community, people with suitable homes, embracing rurality and care for those in need at any age. I'm just going to show you one example, but I won't do this. For example, is under improving public health, which is part of the healthy environment suite of statistics, and all of these are updated whenever the data become available to us. But you can find a huge amount of performance management information through this portal, but I'm led to believe that some of you may not have even known that that existed. So we'll give you access to it, but also make sure that we push things to you as our elected members to make sure that you have access, especially to anything which is changing or any variance from what we have seen previously. So that's something that perhaps what we can do is ask Daniel to send around a link to this particular page immediately after this discussion to the members of this committee, so that you can start having a delve into what we have assembled there. But going back to the performance management framework, and I do apologise if I'm preaching to the converted here, but this is the sort of process that I'm going to build up on the screen at the moment. And it starts with the strategy for the organisation, which, as you know, is an ongoing development and something that we hope to have concluded between officers and members by December this year. But within that strategy, what we really have to have is some targets. And I will talk about what we mean by targets just briefly in a moment, because it's not just a straightforward quantum in every case. Sometimes it can be a bit more complex. And once we've set those targets, we then need to collect and validate the information that will tell us whether or not we are meeting those targets, exceeding those targets, or have a degree of variance from them. And that's the process bit, I'm afraid, where we start trying to find out where can we collect information. And by the way, thank you very much, Sarah, for your great presentation there, but yours is a good example of where we would need to find the information from your systems to gather the information about complaints so that we can develop KPIs and other information about complaints to put forward. We then have an evolving information hub where we store all of our data and information securely, but also where we're able to combine bits of information from different parts of the authority to give us a fuller picture of just what's going on out there. Then the wizards come in from various teams and do their processing and analyses and make sure that we've got the right data that's accurate, reflecting the right periods of time and so on, before we then produce what is the nub of modern performance management. So what we will see increasingly is more and more access to insightful dashboards which surface the information that members need to see, that the public need to see, that our businesses need to see, and that you as elected members want to see, so that we can drill through the performance of any particular part of the authority. And we're doing very well on this in recent times. We've got the right people in the right teams, and we're developing the right approach so that we can develop dashboards which allow people to see at a glance where we're at in a particular matter. But then by clicking on certain charts, we can go a layer beneath and find out what's driving that. And eventually we can come to some decisions. And I think there is a slide later, but this is exactly where the scrutiny and overview function sits very tightly within the performance management framework, because if you've got access to this information, you can do that same level of drilling and understanding that we are doing as officers as well. So the Shropshire plan, which is in development, I think you'll know we're trying to combine a number of things into a single entity, which will be an online document. It won't be a printed document. That means we can keep the Shropshire strategy live and amend it and change it according to circumstances and what's going on in the world. If we had to rewrite a strategy when COVID hit, that would be another strategy. And then after or before that, the floods. We have to be able to have a more dynamic way of responding to our strategy. So that's in development at the moment, and that's where we hope to get some of the targets and expectations, the aspirations and our expectations for outcomes for our customers to be articulated clearly. That's going to be a combination of a strategy, of the service delivery plans for each of the services that we deliver, of our financial strategy, and including some of these other things that you see in front of you, the organizational principles and other things extraneous to the core authority, like the partnerships that we have and the strategies for evolving those partnerships as well. Then we move into the concept of an evaluation methodology. So once we've got some targets and some expectations and we've got some ways of measuring those, we then need to look at the values of those KPIs. We need to look at the direction of travel, where they've come from, where they are, and where we can predict they are going, how they vary from the targets that we have set, but also, as it says on the bottom there, the external benchmarking. A very important thing that we're going to do much more of as an authority is to compare ourselves to our peer authorities and make sure that we're either leading or at least in the right ballpark with peer authorities, especially large rural unitary authorities who have a similar lay of the land that we have. We'll also include things that also in Sarah's responsibilities, the feedback that we're getting around various aspects of what we are doing. I don't want to dwell on this bit, but in terms of those targets, they're not always just, the target is 20. Did we get 20? Sometimes it's a quantity. Sometimes, though, our targets are about a quality of service. And again, Sarah mentioned in her report on complaints that some of those things are about the quality of the service that we're delivering that raises concerns with some of our customers. And then other things are about timeliness. So it's not always as straightforward as simply setting a number. How do you define quality? That becomes more tricky. Timeliness, we have to have the evidence of when something was planned and when it actually happened. And when we say targets, I don't want us to get bogged down too much in the syntax of this, but that might also mean objectives or goals or outcomes or aims. And those words, I think we can quite comfortably use interchangeably when we're talking about what's at the heart of a performance management framework. And briefly on what we can measure and what we can look at, there's the concept of trend. Are things improving? Are they staying roughly the same or are they declining? Where are we according to our target? Are we below? Are we at? Are we exceeding targets? And sometimes exceeding targets isn't a good thing because it might mean we're putting too much resource into one area that could be dedicated elsewhere. So sometimes meeting targets is actually the preference as opposed to exceeding. The benchmarking idea of comparing ourselves with our peers, as I just said, is going to become an increasing part of the validation of what we're doing and ensuring that we're not operating in some kind of vacuum. And then the bit that we want to get to, using the new community of data practitioners that we've assembled under a new banner, and I'll talk about that in a moment, is our ability to project into the future. And that's not just about putting a line on a line chart and seeing where it goes. It's using other data, ONS population projections, many other different pieces of information that we can layer together to give us an insightful view of where we're going in the future. So I think you can see already we're talking about something a bit more sophisticated than that which may have gone before. In terms of the things that we need to be very mindful of in our delivery, all of the data that underpins a performance management system must meet certain standards. Otherwise, we have that concept of rubbish in, rubbish out. So we need to ensure that all of our data are accurate and valid, that they are appearing in the right time periods, and that they are not too old to be of value to us. They ought to be very visual and intuitive, so we're not asking people to read through long tables of data and try and work out what that is telling us. Let's use our skill sets to lift those numbers out of the tables, put them into visuals, so you can see with color and shape and direction of travel where a particular indicator is going. Ideally, we'd be as succinct as possible, and we'll move away from lengthy, wordy documents with lots of indented paragraphs where you have to fight your way through the words to try and get to the meaning. We'll try and make this as intuitive as possible. And of course, all of the data has to be relevant. We shouldn't collect and report on things which aren't going to have an impact on our ultimate ambitions. And our ultimate ambitions are to provide better services to all of our customers, the businesses, the people and the environment of Shropshire. And then they need to be comparable. We need to be able to compare our data internally over time, perhaps between departments where there is comparisons possible, but also externally, going back to the concept of benchmarking. And for those that aren't aware, what we've done is to try and bring together the skill sets that already existed in the council. There's no new blood here, but we're trying to bring all of the people who are information specialists under a single umbrella, under a single manager in Helen Watkinson, who can take the best of all of these skills and get more from the collectives than we had when they were operating in the service areas. So IRIS, the Information Reporting and Insight team at Shropshire, is that grouping, and we're evolving it as we speak. There's a workshop planned soon for how we're going to work to best effect. So there'll be a team within there that looks at data quality, another team that is developing those dashboards using Power BI. And so it's just making much better use of the fragmented skills we had around the organisation by bringing them together as a single community of practice. So what are we going to end up with? Ideally, the sorts of things that the scrutiny committees and the overview function would want to look at is a basket of measures, and that's why my hilarious joke in the bottom left-hand corner, that is a basket of tape measures. So a basket of measures. For each service, we'd ideally have 5 or 6 really high-level KPIs, things that you would want to know about in adult care, in children's care, in early years education, or in any of the other services, including highways, which we've already had quite a discussion about. They would give you the top level. Are we doing well? Are we improving? Are we staying the same? Are we declining? And that's what we really need to see. And the dashboards that we provide for you will give you that information at a glance. But, and I think this is the nub of a performance management framework, we can not really push too many dials to change those outcomes. What we have to understand is what lies underneath a particular key performance indicator, and those are the drivers of that indicator. In some cases, that might only be 1 or 2 facts or situations that we've established. In other cases, it might be much more complicated and be 5 or 6 or 7 different drivers that lead to that outcome. And it's in drilling through these dashboards to get to those drivers of information that we come to the areas where we potentially have no impact, or where potentially we can change our approach to improve the outcomes. And that's where the performance management framework comes to life. That's when we start seeing opportunities for changing what we do to improve the outcomes that we are targeting. So that's where we aim to get to. The audiences are very complex in a complex organisation that you're well aware of as a local government organisation. So we see here the various internal, we've got our services managers and our team leaders and our group leaders, the assistant directors and directors, the executive management team, audit and risk as a function to make sure that we're doing the right thing, and of course The ever-present finance function, making sure that we're doing all these things within budget. Then we've got also internally to the organisation our elected members. We've got the portfolio holders. Hello, Rob, nice to see you. Scrutiny committees, performance scrutiny committees, all of these different pieces fit together, and we have to make sure that we're developing the right outputs to be meaningful to all of those audiences. And then externally, we've got all of our regulators, we've got government departments asking for statutory returns and statistical gazetteers that we are asked to develop. We've got our various partners across especially health, but many other areas, including the voluntary sector. And then we've got the professional bodies that we work to, the peer authorities, and so many more. So it's quite a complex area to try and develop a performance management framework that will work in a dynamic way that meets all of these expectations at the same time. When it comes to those dashboards and the reporting that we do, there's a bit of an evolution going on quite rapidly within Shropshire Council at the moment to modernise all of these, move away from the wordy reports, get more down to the visuals, but also on the dashboard front that they must be, as we've said before, visual and intuitive, but drillable. When you see a chart and it intrigues you because something is in decline or something is like our complements are going up, you might want to press on complements and then see what the drivers are behind that and where those complements are going up. We want to be able to see things in time series, and we want to potentially overlay our targets onto those charts so that we can see at a glance whether or not we're meeting, falling behind or exceeding our targets. The peer comparisons, again, we might be able to click a button on those dashboards and immediately the average performance for our peer authorities would appear and we'll be able to see our place there. I guess the holy grail here is those projections, our ability to be able to predict where we're going with the inputs that we're putting in, what are we doing as activities, what resources have we got, and therefore can we start to do some of the predictions that it says on the right hand side. Our narratives, we need written narratives, but we want to keep those to a minimum so that we don't distract people from the facts and the figures with lots and lots of words. So we'll keep those succinct, but they will be delivered by the services, not by anybody in our information teams, because it is service specific and they are the experts in what is going on. So we will ask them to provide those narratives. And then, of course, what we're going to do within the narratives and the written documentation is to pull out what has changed or what is exceptional. We don't particularly want to focus on things which are going well, have been going well for a long time and look like they're going to continue to do well. That's not something that requires our attention. What does require attention is where there are anomalies. Our chair just mentioned that the rise in looked after children being one of the anomalies that we've identified across the authority. So we need to be able to use these systems to drill down and find out what's going on there, which geographical locations, which particular cohorts of children is that affecting, and so on. And that's where this stuff becomes very, very powerful. So then we become very opportunity focused, and that's again where the role of overview and scrutiny comes in, using this as one of your tools to enable you to be more effective in your role. We look forward to presenting you with very meaningful information that can help you on that. Finally will be the production, and this is toward the end of a journey that I've described that we are on. Tools which will allow us to make evidence-based predictions about where we're going. We can never quite predict, but we can give an indication of where we think we are going. And then these concepts of what if analysis. What would happen if we changed the number of people who do this role, or we extended the number of hours that this service was open? And if we build the right tools, we should be able to put those hypothecated ideas into a system to give us a prediction or an indication of where we think the outputs and the outcomes would be at the end. And that's the process of hypothecation. We're some way off that, but we do have other authorities and other businesses where we can learn from some best practice and maybe get towards that sooner rather than later. In terms of the ongoing development of all of this, we are, as we've said before, developing the Shropshire strategy, or the Shropshire plan rather, which is that coming together of several things all at once. We've shared this with the assistant director layer of the organisation for their input, and they've been very valuable in trying to bring more sense to this. Our alignment with the Performance Scrutiny Committee, which we're beginning today. And then I think there'll be need for a multidisciplinary panel to try and guide us on some of the things that we're doing before getting on with building these Power BIs. Now it says there before we begin, we've actually built several of these already. And what I want to be able to do the next time I sit before you is to show you some truly brilliant working examples of this, which are as intuitive as we hope that they will be. We've got 2 or 3 examples. I didn't want to bring them to you too early, so we want to make sure that they're all working. But the next time we speak, I promise you that we'll have some very engaging and useful Power BI tools that are based on our own data and information. We're talking to the LGA, and why wouldn't we? They've got, you know, representation of all local authorities, and there's some best practice to be learned from there. And then we need to consider some of the resources. If we're going to become a performance-led organisation, at the moment we have a very finite number of highly skilled staff able to do this digital work, and we'll need to look at either growing some more of that capacity internally, retraining some people where their skill sets are becoming less cutting edge, or perhaps even the idea of investing to save by bringing in some more people who can provide this intuitive information on the ground. The concept of overview and scrutiny, we've mentioned this as we've talked through, but the idea that you would be able to, as a group of committees and a group of elected members, be able to work using these core tools to become our critical constructive friends, to look through all of that information, to do the drilling through the dashboards that we provide you in order to identify some of those negative trends or the anomalies from what we were hoping or what we were expecting. The adverse benchmarking against peer authorities, and that's the one that will always raise eyebrows, where we see that Herefordshire are doing something better than us, heaven forfend, or opportunities for any kind of service improvement. And that's really very much the function of the scrutiny role, is to support the whole council in doing things better. That would trigger, we hope, a constructive collaborative investigation of the causes, the underlying drivers, with the right officers, in order for a proper scrutiny of those services and the inputs to occur, which would allow you, in combination with the right officers, to make some recommendations for how we can improve. Those would then have to go through the appropriate channels, and if approved and thought to be the right way forward, I think it would be the role of the overview and scrutiny committees to revisit those on a timely basis to ensure that any implementation of recommendations to improve what we're doing had actually been realised. So I realise I talked at you extensively there, but that's the end of my slides, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, Alden. So this new word is brilliant, isn't it? Hypothecation. Is it? Yeah, very good word. Yeah, I'd be interested actually in measuring your performance when you've got all this done, because obviously I'm expecting some very big improvements across the piece there. But anyway, we'll perhaps leave that for a future meeting. So we got any questions for all? Ah, here we go. David Fassman.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thanks for that very detailed presentation. I just wanted a couple of questions really. Is that we had there was a paper produced at Cabinet today, which I think is I'm sure is related to the work that you're doing. Is that correct?
Can I just clarify with James, which paper would that have been, James? Was that the one on the development of the Shropshire Plan?
It was the Q1 performance report.
Yeah, absolutely. So I made reference to that at the beginning of the slide deck, which is one of the current sources, but we have begun the process of representing that in a more intuitive, more visual way. So you'll find that the front of that Q1 performance report would have been in the format required, but in order to try and get to that place where we are modernising and improving the look and the feel, the accessibility of performance information, we have begun the process of more visualising that information in the appendix that was provided. That's only one of the steps on the way. We hope to go considerably further for the next issue of the quarterly report for the end of Q2, and hopefully, if the feedback is the right feedback, people will welcome the departure from information being captured in words to more of the information being presented in accessible visuals.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I just want to, I mean, choosing your indicators is very, very important. And for example, in that report we have, there's an indicator there about embrace our rurality and about new affordable homes, and saying that the new affordable homes have gone up, and this is a plus point, a green arrow. But in actual fact, I think one of the areas you should be looking at is the total number of affordable homes which are available in rural areas, and I think that would see an arrow going in different directions being red. So, I'm concerned about the way in which you're choosing indicators, and that there should be some sort of member involvement in the.
Absolutely.
Do that.
Absolutely right. And if I hadn't made it clear, that's precisely what we are working, particularly with the Performance Management Scrutiny Committee, is to be driven by you as elected members. So what I'm talking about today is the concepts around what we will provide. In the Q1 report, you have got something which is built on what went on in the past, but we are very open to evolving that to become precisely what elected members need to see to get an understanding of where we've come from, where we're at, and where we need to be getting to. So none of those things are fixed in stone. In the spirit of the more collaborative way of working between officers and members, that's absolutely where we will be engaging. So expect that suite of KPIs in any place where you see them, be it the Q1 report, be it on the performance portal or anywhere else. Expect those to change potentially quite significantly over the months and possibly years to come, as we evolve to develop a way of interacting with the authority which gives us the right impression, not one which is dictated by officers who think this is available, we'll give it to them. It's very much more a collaboration from now on.
Okay, thank you. So I've got Roger, Julia, Les and Alan. Roger.
Thank you, Chairman. I was going to pick it up, but I've looked at the report which went to the Cabinet this morning, the performance one, and we may be looking at it in December. But if we look at the homes, for example, information that I would want as a scrutiny is the number of properties on the council tax valuation list, direction of travel horizontal. That's a total number. How many properties were taken off? Because there will be some that were taken off. So you've got the information there, and it looks like the number of properties are increasing. But what about those that were taken off for some reason, and also the long-term empty ones? It's that sort of information which members are actually chasing and want. It's just an example of where us members, I think, would bring some input into it for what we would like to see as well, so that we can go to officers and say, why is that? Where are we? What are we doing about it? Which is where we're coming from performance.
Yeah. So I think, Roger, where we want to get to is, in consultation with Alden, we're going to come up with some, what we think are the main key performance indicators. And obviously what's important to officers possibly might not be so important for members. Members have different priorities. That's why it's important to work together. So it's very much a work in progress, and this is like the introduction really. It's not even the first chapter.
Okay, so it's being able to drill down, and as was picked up. So that's a headline, yes, but outside the meetings, enable members to actually drill down to see what's there, bring forward the relevant information.
Yeah. And I think.
Can I come in there?
Yeah.
It's precisely what you say, Councillor Evans. We're going to get to a place where those dashboards are available to you as members, probably through the members gateway, but you can actually access those. And what you're talking about there would be the headline KPI, and what you want to see are the drivers that we were talking about. And as we build these dashboards, and I'm sorry, it is going to take time, it's just a complicated area to work our way through, we will put those drivers of each KPI there, so that when you're thinking, why did this happen? What's the underlying cause of that? You will be able to click through. And if something's missing, you'll be able to contact our team and find out more from them. And ideally, that would lead to a gentle evolution of these dashboards so that they are including the right drivers to be intuitive to both officers and members. But as I say, bear with us. It's quite a journey that we're undertaking, but we're very much up for the fight.
So James, did you want to?
Yeah, just a little point of clarification. in relation to David and Roger's question. The quarter one report is based on the previous corporate plan, and the quarter two report will probably be based on that as well, given where we are at the moment. So the measures that are in there are based on those historic measures. What the leader said at Cabinet earlier today in relation to that was that the corporate plan is being redeveloped, and the plans that would be going to council in December, and gave a commitment that the scrutiny could be involved in the drawing of that corporate plan. So what that means is that behind that overarching priorities within that, there will be a series of measures, which is what Alden's referred to continually around that performance-driven culture. So there will be then measures behind that, which will allow us to consider and manage and identify whether we're actually on track in delivering that overall corporate plan. So there will be opportunity for scrutiny to feed into that. And what we will get is a high level reporting within on a quarterly basis, but behind that, and drillable down, if that's even the correct term, behind that will then be the information that flows beyond. So in response to Roger's example, in terms of council tax dwellings, that is the net number. That is the net number. So it's taking account of those that have gone on and off the list. It's taking account of the long-term empties, etc. It's that net figure. What you'd be looking at in that example would then be to take that overarching figure and break that down to say how many have gone to the empty list, how many have been removed, how many have been added as new homes and whatever. Now, that information exists right now. You can go onto the government website and it will show you, you have to search for Shropshire, and then within Shropshire you can get all that information detailed about it in detail. What we want to do is to pull all that together so that you can then consider it and see it as you wish, and you can find that information much more quickly, tailored to exactly what you want to do. Hopefully that's helpful, but as has been referred to, that's a long way from where we are right now. So it's going to be at least a couple of quarters of the same information before we start to get moving in that direction.
Just to say, Chairman, yes, I have been onto the government website and see the returns that are made. As you say, trying to understand them and find the relevant one that I want to see does take a long time.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you, Julia.
Yeah, first of all, I really welcome this approach, and in my former life I worked at Wolverhampton City Council that used this approach to completely modernise how they focused resources to achieve more efficient results. So I really welcome it, and I'm really quite optimistic about where this will lead us. So thank you for starting us on what I imagine will be quite a long journey. My next point refers to the drilling down that everyone's talking about. The obvious difference between Wolverhampton and Shropshire is our rurality. So the drilling down that I'm most keen to see is geographic. What worries me most of all is a global KPI. So, more than 75% of residents in Shropshire do not live in Shrewsbury. So if you are to give us a global KPI for things that are achieved or delivered or so on, unless we know how that breaks down by, not necessarily by division, but say by southeast, northeast and so on, we're not really going to understand the differences between service delivery, because when we're talking about embracing rurality, the fundamental principle of this authority is equal access to services irrespective of how rurally you live. My fear is that we don't do it very equally, and my fear is that's something we've really got to keep an eye on. So just going back to providing affordable housing, I'm a member on the STAR board. I'm delighted to tell you the centre, north and east of the county are really well provided for. The west of our county is really poorly provided in affordable housing because the cost of land is so high. So if you want to just put up a map showing those dots, or to break it down by 4 or 5 subsections of Shropshire, you would see actually exactly what we need to do next. So we really must break this down geographically so we do not become hostages to fortune. We will look really silly if we put out some really good news stories that says we've done 90% of this or 80% of that, and then somebody looks on the map and it turns out we only did it in one place.
If I can respond to that, I'd be very happy to do that. That's precisely what the technology now allows us to do. As long as the underlying data relating to each of the components that rolls up to become the Shropshire Global KPI, as long as those data are available at that level, then the dashboards that you will see will allow you to select what you want to look at. And so imagine some radio buttons down the side of a dashboard which is talking about the proportion of affordable versus non-affordable new homes, you would be able to click on whether or not we're talking about towns or villages, or whether we're talking about north, south, east or west, and whether we're talking about other cuts of the data. So wherever the data are available, it's quite straightforward to build into the Power BI dashboard technologies the ability for you to cut that any which way you want. And in the spirit of complete transparency that we're looking for across the collaboration of members and officers now, you will have access to precisely the same levels of data and the cuts that are possible as our officers will, because that's the only way that we're going to move forward together. So we absolutely understand that. And I hope next time I come to see you, we will have some working examples that I can demonstrate, which show precisely how flexible those things can be. And the options and radio buttons that you can turn on and off will give you a great deal of flexibility, and you'll be able to click through to the underlying drivers as well. That's our ambition very much.
Thank you. I have no doubt that the technology enables us to do it, and already through the members portal we can already pick our own division and get some really good stuff. Frequently. What I'm talking about is, as an authority, when we are reporting to Cabinet, to performance every quarter in the performance management report in our corporate plan, that we also publicly report beyond the global level, so that we are being quite accurate in terms of where the issues are, rather than just the headline being a global figure, because I fear that will lead us into some issues. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So, Les.
My question's been answered, thank you.
Oh, okay. Alan.
I hope you'll excuse me for being slightly cynical, because I do get a strong sense of deja vu in seeing this presentation and recollecting similar presentations over the years. Good luck in finally getting it right this time.
Thank you.
Where Julie was talking about. I think getting it right is also not just rural and urban, east or west. It's also about social and economic demographics and age demographics, and the disparities in our performance in some areas based on those parameters and others. But the point I was going to make, and I was going to challenge James Walton, because he's telling us that we're pretty strapped for cash. How, when all these dashboards come out and show there's significant underperformance in some areas, how he's going to provide the wherewithal in order for us to put it right?
He hasn't got a cake for the one.
I don't expect a reply now. There's something to take into account.
I'll give you a accurate response. Clearly I can't magic up funding to take in a particular direction. What this is more concerned about is about setting. I think let's go a different way. What we've done as an organisation in the past is we have let the budget kind of drive the activity of the authority, and our ambition has been based on trying to make the budget balance. I think if you look at that from the other direction, I think it goes back to what Julie said earlier. If you have a corporate plan, a strategic direction that's set on a series of outcomes, the question then is how can you get those outcomes really on board with them? So rather than saying here's a service, let's spend the best money on it, and somehow magically hope the performance will improve, instead you say let's set some performance parameters and some requirements around what we actually need to achieve, and then let's put funding in that place. That means that there will be other areas that you are automatically saying we are going to be of a lower priority for the organisation, and that's where you then have to redistribute that funding on that basis. So ultimately, you work out what matters, and then you deliver what matters, as opposed to what we do at the moment. And so that is a fundamental change in approach. And it's going to take a bit of time to work its way through, but that would be my answer to that question, and I hope that I'm wishing in that endeavour too.
Yeah, and I think the trick with this, I take on board what Alan said and Julia said, and you know, you put garbage in, you get garbage out, so it's really important we have the right stuff in there in the first place, but how we look at it, you know, so that it makes sense, because otherwise, if you split it up too much, I think you won't get a proper view because you just break it up and break it up. You've got to do it in such a way that it actually makes sense. And that's the trick, and I have no idea which is the best way. And I think there's a lot of work to do, and hopefully the members will have quite a bit of input with the officers in trying to find something that's representative for everybody in Shropshire. So thank you very much indeed, Alden. Did you want to say something, Rob?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask the question. Obviously, the corporate plan's there to deliver the policies and the strategies from the administration. And I'm just sort of checking, is there the opportunity there to start measuring against those? So say we've got a strategy on housing, is there a way to pull out indicators that will show us how we're performing against that? And going forward, if this is the direction we're working towards, which it seems, this is the opportunity as policy and strategies are developed to build in to make sure that that data is collected, so then it's easy to prove this is delivering what the leader and what cabinet are looking for, and be able to evidence that as well. Sounds good.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Oh, sorry, Andy.
That's the could, because I'd like to build on both that and Alan's comment previously, because I think that they're both right. And what Alden said at the beginning was that this was part of the development of performance management framework. That really this is half of it, and this is the half that you will see and you'll scrutinise and you'll interact with. The other half, I think, speaks more, which is really about how the corporate plan then we can hold each other to account in the corporate plan and then those outcomes that we're looking for. The second part that we introduced at the beginning of the next financial year is really around the mechanics of the organisation and the performance framework that staff will operate within. And we'll understand poor performance, as you're talking about, in a very different way. We'll start to understand capacity within service areas. We'll start to understand the quality issues, the timing issues, all the things that we've spoken about this afternoon. So that's a kind of second part of this that will come into play at the beginning, hopefully at the beginning of the next financial year. That's the sort of plan, and then you bring that together, and then you get a very, very clear view of the organisation. But not only that, you can know where to push buttons, where to put resources, where to remove resources, where to tweak to make it work better. So I think that's a bit of the difference with this, that we're trying to come at it from both perspectives. So that's why I just wanted to respond to you, Rob, and to you, Alan, because I think those are both two ends of the same. Fantastic.
Yep, we're happy with that one. Okay, right, thank you. Have we got any more questions? No? Well, interesting times, Alden. Thank you so much. I have to say, when I talk to you, you make me so enthusiastic and bubbly about all this, because I think, hopefully we're going to be able to improve the way that we work dramatically. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. And if there's any feedback that people want to give me offline, as we say, we're on an evolving journey here and it's going to have some bumps. So bear with us, but we're very determined. It's been seen to be worked and achieved the right results elsewhere. There's no reason at all why we can't get there now that we've got a tone and an atmosphere about improving and modernising what we do. So very excited about being part of that journey with you all. And I look forward to speaking to you again another time.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Alden. Right, so I propose that we note this report. Is everyone content with that? Get your hands so that we can show everybody on screen we're all content. Thank you very much indeed. So I don't intend to do much about the work programme number 8 because Daniel's not here, but I will say, Roger, and you know what I'm going to say, we should have looked at the...
I'm not going to make that up, Jim.
Okay, so we will make sure that that's worked into the dates and the diaries. Absolutely. So what else did you want to say, Roger?
Members' benefit, that was about the quarterly finance.
Yeah.
And it's partly a question for the Chief Executive as well. Looking at the forward plan, I can't see September's. I can see August forward plan, but nothing on this website here that I can see is for September. And I see the Cabinet programme. Congratulations to James for putting in the slots in all the committee cabinet programme, but there's slots filled in for the September cabinet, but there's nothing else for any other director bringing any reports to cabinet or anything about that. So fitting up the performance scrutiny to look at anything that the council is doing, it's impossible to do because there's no way that I can marry up the two. I also see that James is producing the finance Q2 and the performance Q2 to the 15th of December cabinet programme. We're down to meet on the 1st of December. So whether we have it then or not, but at the 15th of December, the cabinet will be looking at the financial strategy for 22-23. So are we going to be able to look at it? It isn't on the programme at present, but do the dates of our performance scrutiny need to be looked at in conjunction with officers and the reports that they produce, so that we can have some input and maybe comments or feed into cabinet or something like that constructively.
Yeah.
What is it? So it's bringing everything together, and dates I would suggest may need to be looked at by
Yeah, I was just going to say that to Amanda and to James, perhaps, because obviously they always struggle to get the reports ready in time. So maybe we need to bring our meeting forward by a week, so it's a week in front of cabinet or whatever. Look at the days so that we can do that.
My chair. What we try to do is to get as much information as can on that board plan, and we've built it around dates that we can fit in around cabinet. So to get those to fit in. And the assumption that we've made there is that there will either be task and finish groups or there will be scrutiny meetings which will then work around that kind of format. So we haven't been able to take into account the existing scrutiny meetings and make that work as well. So unfortunately, the meetings were set up as they were. We've worked around the cabinet meetings, the council meetings, around things like consultation on the budget, etc. We've built all that in, and then we've made the assumption at this point that then there'll be further discussion around what scrutiny you want to look at, which elements you want to look at, and how that will fit in. And there is the opportunity for things like, as I say, task and pinch groups, perhaps in the kind of October, November period, also in the January period, to look specifically at elements of the developing financial strategy, but also importantly, based on everything you said earlier, around the development of corporate plan as well. Because I think the corporate plan bit is really important to take a look at this year and get right in conjunction with the financial strategy. What would be really nice would be to put the financial strategy on hold for 12 months, get the corporate plan right, and then come back and work that out. Unfortunately, we have to try and do those things in parallel, and that does mean that what would be helpful is if members can keep those two sides of the equation in their mind as they go through all of that work to ensure that we try and keep them aligned and get the direction travel correct.
Right, okay. Are you happy with that, Roger?
I'll leave the chief executive to look at the forward plan, but I would have thought that if we're looking at Q2, which finishes September the 30th, I would have thought by the end of November it should be available, which is 2 months for us to have a look at, to maybe make some comments to feed in to the financial strategy that the cabinet will be producing. I know there's a finance task and finish group, but I think they are a subsidiary to this, so that it's feeding it into here. So that's the point I'm making, Chairman. I'll leave it with you to take forward to see how that can fit in with the resources that are available from the council.
Yeah, I mean, I think to have any meaningful input into it all, it's more than the meeting. I mean, so I do think it's a combination of the financial task and finish group. But I think we'll have to leave that to Daniel and James to have a look at and see which is the best way forward. So I think it is important for us to have input, but we need the time to have proper input as well. Are you happy to do that, James?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, good. Okay. So, if everyone's happy, thank you very much indeed for coming today. It's been quite a warm one. Take care and stay safe. Keep your masks on and keep washing your hands because the numbers are going up. No, I think we're going to leave that because Daniel's not here. Is that all right? Yeah. Okay, thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Amanda. Cheers.
Okay, you did very well with your back.
You,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Oh, right, hold on. So conscious about what you're doing.
Yeah, that power link is like this.
Oh, is it? Where's the other end?